So, oh, some people come or not? No. So in classical finance, investors are assumed to be rational agents who always prefer more wealth to less. It's a quote of two Nobel laureates in economics. And some consequence of this, another Nobel laureate in economics stated that there is one and only one social responsibility of business to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, so long as it engages in open and free competition. Well, we know, on the other hand, in various research in behavioral finance, that real people are not always rational in the spirit of classical finance. And most often this happens because humans may be driven by their cognitive errors or emotions like greed and fear. Also, some investors strive for social responsibility, or at least for social status. And you can acquire some social status if you, say, pay a lot of money for a charity dinner devoted to saving Amazonian forests, and next day go to trade Lombard made of this forest. Or you maybe try to be more serious and try to accommodate social responsible investing in your trading decisions. So therefore, there is a burgeoning fields ESG investing that address this interest of actually quite a few investors in socially responsible investing. There are several taxonomies describing what ESG investing is about, and for those who don't know anything about ESG, so it's environmental, social, and governance categories. In fact, they are called pillars. And the three pillars are partitioned in more than 20 different categories along environment, governance, and social directions. There are several problems in ESG investing, and I will emphasize two of them. First, it's ambiguity in deriving ESG ratings based on self-reporting. For those who is not involved in this business, I should say that the current state of art in this business is that there are rating agencies that assign some ratings, similarly in some sense to credit ratings, to each publicly traded company. And those ESG ratings are based on self-reporting. In fact, it's a generally incompatible mix of these ESG categories, like 26 or something like that I showed on the previous slide. All these categories are basically ranking variables. So what is done, these ratings are mapped onto the grid from, say, 0 to 10 or 0 to 100. And then some expert in ratings agency says this company has like 55 and another is 72 and so on. And basically these ratings are based on self-reporting of the companies, which can lead to so-called greenwashing, which means simply that the companies lie. There is a suggestion that we make that we better use so-called news-based ESG ratings instead of ratings based on corporate self-reporting. What means news-based ESG ratings is that some other companies, it's basically young technology companies, that screen news along thousands independent informational sources and derive some sentiment index. If there are good news, obviously this index will be higher. If there are bad news, this will be lower. This approach at least prevents to some degree of greenwashing. And another suggestion that we make is that investors should decide for themselves how to define ESG ratings. You see, what this rating agency offers, it's kind of aggregated score along all scores for all the 26 categories. And again, it's just mixing apples and tomatoes or whatever you want to mix in your salad, which may not make sense. And there are even comical situations, or some may call it scandalous situations, because of this incompatibility. For example, one of the major ratings agencies threw out the company Tesla, which you probably know about, from its ESG index, probably because they didn't like the CEO. And I'm not fan of this CEO either, but if you throw out of this ESG index the pioneering companies that introduced qualitative new technology, green technology, electric vehicles, and you leave Exxon in this index, which is one of the major polluters in the world, clearly some people may be confused. So the alternative is that these agencies, rating agency, provide their ratings upon each category, and investors may mix them the way they want. For example, those investors who care only about climate change can choose only those categories that are directly related to this problem. And I'll show examples. Another problem with ESG investing is that in the recent past there was a lot of hype that ESG tilted investments outperform ESG neutral investments like mutual funds or indexes and so on. And this opinion was pushed by consultants in academia and asset managers who created products that they claim would outperform entire market just because the weights of good in the ESG sense companies will higher than ESG ratings of the bad companies, which might sometimes happen to be true. For example, when the price of oil is low, obviously energy company underperform and software company outperform them. And if you create a portfolio that has more software companies than energy companies, obviously it will outperform entire market. But this situation is, again, competing sectors versus sectors, rather than to be directly related to ESG qualities of their investments. In fact, situation is completely different, and I will show you examples of portfolios where correlations between ESG ratings of the companies and their returns are not only low, they may be even negative. And this creates confusion for investors because in the end of the day, we all invest in order to increase our wealth. And social responsibilities is kind of secondary part. We try to be nice, but in fact we invest for self-interest, so to speak. And if you know that if you overweight holdings of good in the ESG sense companies and as a result lose your returns, it gives you a pause. So the alternative to general approach, what we suggest is that if you are serious about socially responsible investing, you need to use portfolio performance measures that are explicitly dependent on portfolio ESG value. The classical portfolio performance measure, it's a Sharpe ratio. it's a ratio between return and the volatility of your stock price in your portfolio. The reason is that most investors are risk averse. In fact, most people hate more their losses than love their returns. And therefore, this ratio, it's really, at least in professional investing, it is a major performance ratio. Now, in classical finance, the only risk that we know about is price volatility. Price volatility may help, if you buy a growth company and they have great return, but they may have also tremendous losses. And so, in general, investors try to minimize volatility of their portfolio. So when you divide returns with volatility, you get some compromise between risk and return. Now, if you're socially responsible investors and care about ESG investing, what you need to do is to modify this portfolio performance measure so that it explicitly depends on ESG value. Because, in fact, these 26 or so ESG categories can be considered as non-pecuniary or non-financial risks. So what risks are they? Well, the company that violates some regulation can be subjected to expensive lawsuits. Sometimes consumers or customers of the company declare boycott of its products if they are really bad, or say employ child labor and so on. And finally, if companies are not nice to their employees, you can expect union strikes. Those are all risks that serious investors may want to consider, let alone climate change that actually subject to risks, all kind of atmospheric events that can hurt the company business. So this implies that what we want to do for socially responsible investing is to account three variables, and sometimes it's called three-dimensional investing. We want to optimize our portfolio not only upon return and volatility risk, but also upon ESG value or the risk associated with it. So that's the ideas, and this is technicality about how to optimize portfolio. It's mean variance theory. It's described in all textbook on portfolio management. I will skip them, just noting that we talk about portfolio weight. So we have holdings and holdings, and they have particular weights. The sum of weights equal 1. And when we try to optimize the portfolio return in the sense that either we want to minimize portfolio volatility risk or maximize Sharpe ratio. And there are some problems with this theory that are widely publicized. What is not textbook material is that mean variance portfolio theory has a flavor of momentum. Because what this says, in fact, what you do when you try to use this theory for investing, you optimize your portfolio in some calibration past period of time and hope that the winners in the past will be continuing leaders in the near future. And this is the idea, that's what momentum is about. At least you hope that momentum will continue, and it may continue if the distribution of returns in near future will be stationary. But often it's not the case, and therefore often due to estimation errors of the portfolio in sample leads to the fact that equal weight portfolios without any optimization may outperform these mean variance portfolios. Another problem is that the optimization process may yield extreme long and short positions. And most investors don't risk to invest in short positions. Some, or maybe even most mutual funds are prohibited to do so. And therefore, there is often constraint that all weights should be greater than 0 are used in this protocol. And ironically, even though mean variance portfolio theory was proposed for increasing diversification of portfolio, and that's the only free lunch in fact, in investing. You diversify your portfolio because you don't know what will happen tomorrow. But since mean variance portfolio create poor portfolio diversity, there are some constraints used for maximum weight that you can use in this portfolio. And again, poor portfolio diversity is a result of the fact that the optimization protocol chooses only past winners and wants to deal with them, only with them in future. And if it's allowed to have short positions, obviously all losers will be shorted. Again, this increases risk for future. There is also a concept of partial correlations that helps increase portfolio diversity. And the definition of partial correlations that may be used instead of classical Pearson's correlation is that if you have two variables xi and xj, that is conditioned on some variable xk. And this partial correlation measures correlation between residuals of linear regressions xi on xk and xj on xk. The result is that this correlation, partial correlations, are usually much weaker than Pearson's correlations, and therefore portfolio are more diversified. These correlations can be calculated via Pearson correlation very quickly. So the classical mean variance minimizing objective functions, it's a risk, it's a portfolio variance minus return. We want to minimize negative returns, which means maximizing return. And what we add to this minimizing function is portfolio PSG value, where gamma is ESG strength parameter that is investor's choice. How important for you is to be socially responsible, may be controlled by this parameter. So let me show you some examples. We used news-based ESG scores from True Value Labs. Now it's FactSet company. And we use all these 26 categories, which I mentioned in one of the initial slides. And we chose aggregated values, all 26. And then we choose also individual ecological impact, denoted by ECO, and greenhouse gas emissions, GHG. So again, we did it for those investors to compare results for those investors who may be interested only in this or in this categories of risk. And there is a difference between ECO and GHG categories. They don't overlap in the True Value Labs terminology. So ecological impact covers water pollution, environmental project life cycles, and impacts of biodiversity, but the GHG focuses on sustainable transportation, fuel cost, emissions, renewable energy, and climate lawsuits. but not on raw emission data. It's all based on news about these categories. So, and here is example, correlations. So it's example for portfolio based on the holdings of material sector. You can see correlations with returns. For ESG, it's practically zero. For eco, it's slightly negative. And for GHG, it's negative 15%. So obviously, if you blindly want to somehow help to climate change and invest in a GHG portfolio, you will lose about 15% of your return. This is not good. Now, when you optimize using the protocol I described, mean variance protocol in 3 dimensions, you can get results in which I introduce the notion of ESG tilted Sharpe ratio. So the idea is that Sharpe ratio unfortunately decreases with increasing GHG value, but this term increases. And so there is an optimal value for Sharpe ratio, for ESG tilted Sharpe ratio, that can be treated by socially responsible investors as optimal value. In other words, there is no free lunch. If you want to really contribute to mitigating climate change or anything else, you need to pay for that. And by the same token, as you sacrifice with return because you try to avoid volatility of your portfolio, price volatility of your portfolio. By the same token, you have to pay for your desire to be a nice citizen. And this ESG tilted Sharpe ratio does exactly that. As I mentioned, in this news-based ratings, the results are obtained using news related to greenhouse gases. But it's news, and the problem is that they have a window like 6 months, they collect news, and if all news good for Exxon, it doesn't say that Exxon is major polluter. And so the news-based GHG rating may be pretty good. And the company may manipulate the marketing department, sales department, obviously produce a lot of news with positive sentiment. And more objective is if you are concerned with greenhouse emissions, to use the term in your calculations that is directly related. It's measured all emissions of your portfolio. And we also introduce aversion to greenhouse gas emissions, and we plug it in our optimization protocol. But now, as Sharpe ratio related to GHG has negative sentiment, of course, greenhouse gas emissions, so it's not plus like in ESG value, but minus portfolio GHG aversion term. So this is example for a portfolio that has 33 constituents of energy sector, and those are companies that are in the portfolio, and they are ordered here in terms of intensity, so that the smallest intensity, greenhouse gas intensity, emission intensity, is for its ticker of the company, BKR. And here is the thing. So if you ignore greenhouse gas emissions and calculate optimal portfolio for optimal weights for this portfolio, out of 30 plus holdings, you have only 6 non-zero weights. Everything else are losers. They were losers in the past, so they don't include are not included in your portfolio. So this is for zero aversion to greenhouse gases. Now, if your aversion grows, the weights of all these companies change. Because now these weights account not only returns and volatility, price volatility, but also amount of emissions they produce. And the optimal portfolio is somewhere else. I will show you exactly its holding. But on this slide, just pay attention. Then if you really hate greenhouse gas emissions, really hate, then the weight of the holdings with the minimal emissions becomes 100% in the end of the day. So if you just want to invest a little bit in energy sector and you hate greenhouse gas emissions, choose this company. Or that was the case in 2023. And optimal portfolio, as I said, so for Pearson correlations, only two holdings are here. And no, by the way, zero weight for this company that has lowest emissions because its returns were mediocre at best. For partial correlation-based portfolio, there is a little bit, 10%, about 10% of BKR. And you have three different weights. So that's a protocol for finding a compromise between traditional priorities of investors, which is return and volatility, and socially responsible investing that wants to address these risk factors that are close to their soul, so to speak. Well, I think I exhausted my time, but that's conclusions that I already spelled out. So that's all. Thank you.